Good afternoon and welcome to Iowa Ideas. I'm Liz Kennedy, Senior Product Manager of Quarter Careers, our local jobs platform and audience development at the Gazette. This session is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Hiring Process and Onboarding, part of the Workforce Track. Today, we'll welcome our panel for discussion and take audience questions. Please note that closed captioning is available if you prefer. You can enable it in your Zoom or your Whova recording. And then all of our sessions are being recorded. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Inclusive ICR.
Hi friends, Angelica Vanetta, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to check out our website at inclusivicr.org for upcoming events and our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
Thank you, Inclusive ICR. All right, we're ready to kick this off. Understanding employer and prospective employee goals and matching talent and skill sets to workplace culture that will position both for long-term success is at the heart of expanding DEI in the hiring and onboarding process in Iowa. From help wanted to accepting an offer to the first year as a new employee, we're going to talk about what practices are working and where the challenges still lie. I'd like to welcome our panelists. With us, we have Anthony Arrington, CEO of Top Rank Talent Solutions and member of Inclusive ICR. Anthony is a certified diversity executive and certified diversity and belonging facilitator. A native of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, he received a BA in communication studies from the University of Iowa. He has over 25 years of leadership training and consulting experience across multiple industries, including a decade of combined recruiting and DEI and B consulting experience. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
Next, Elizabeth Buch. Elizabeth is a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager for the city of Cedar Rapids. She's charged with executing the city's first comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy by promoting and enhancing DEI within the organization through programs, training, and services. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Next, Miranda Swafford. Miranda is a professional with over 15 years of successful experience in public and nonprofit management. Currently, she serves as the executive director to the Mississippi Valley Workforce Development Board, a nonprofit organization overseeing the workforce services in Jackson, Clinton, Scott, Muscatine, Henry, Louisa, Des Moines, and Lee counties. Welcome, Miranda.
Thank you.
And last, we have Nick Ford. Nick is a certified diversity executive, certified culture facilitator, and certified culture assessor. In the United States Navy with their nuclear program, Nick started his career as an enlisted member and worked his way up through the ranks, retired honorably after successfully serving as a limited duty officer. With over 30 years of leadership and training experience, Nick has become a master training specialist while in the Navy. Good afternoon and welcome, Nick.
Thanks.
All right, let's just kick this off. We've got some questions to go through here. As we continue to evolve hiring and onboarding post-pandemic, can you talk a little bit about what's changed in Iowa's hiring landscape with respect to diversity, inclusion, and equity? Let's start with you, Miranda.
Sure. Post-COVID, the workforce shortage, employers are having a tougher time filling their open positions, and they're really having to rethink of how they recruit and, onboard the employees. They're really trying to tap into those populations that have been previously, underrepresented in the workforce. And they're really focusing more on the soft skills instead of the formal training, understanding that, if someone fits into their culture, that they can provide them the formal on-the-job training themselves, and really trying to have more of a place-based approach when it comes to recruitment. Really taking their job fairs and their recruitment events into communities that necessarily would not have had access to those types of opportunities before. They're also, really reevaluating the work structure. Are they really needed to come into the office 40 hours a week, or can they do a telework option? and really kind of reevaluating their benefits packages. Can they restructure and provide more family-friendly benefits, such as, on-site childcare or some transportation solutions to kind of remove those barriers for some of the job seekers to get back into the workforce after COVID, or to just enter the workforce for the first time.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. It's super interesting just kind of looking back at what all changed because of the pandemic. Everyone who was involved in the hiring and recruiting process, and of course all aspects of an organization, really had to flip the switch with when the pandemic started, and trying to still serve customers and still engage and fill those positions that you were talking about, Miranda, but doing it in a very different way. And I know so many organizations tried multiple things, like virtual job fairs. I know I attended one of those just out of curiosity, what's this about? This seems interesting, just to sit in on it. And there was some good takeaways from that, like what worked, what didn't work. So I think it was really just navigating around this new effort. But I do want to talk a little bit more about what Miranda's talking about as well, of kind of going where people are. So at the city, we one of our newer mobile programs is our Rec Mobile, and so that specifically is for park and rec activities. But we're really taking that concept of we have so many jobs that we need to fill. Iowa, like many states around the nation, are really trying to fill positions, and finding that many organizations from small to large are understaffed, and that's causing some closures or some not being open all of the time, or whatever it may be. So taking that concept of not everyone's going to come to you, and there's a lot of great potential employees out there. How can we meet them where they are? So working here at the city, there's been several different teams who've gone to just different areas within the community here in Cedar Rapids, gone to places from grocery stores to parks to different convenience type stores and places where people just normally go in routine, and just have a spot there where they can just informally be there, and that's kind of an opportunity where anyone in the community, they just see you, they see a logo that maybe they recognize, or maybe they don't, and they're curious to learn a little bit more. So I think really being open to going somewhere outside of your four walls is something that I'm super excited about, that a lot of other organizations have been doing as well.
Yeah, I would just go ahead, Anthony.
I think I think organizations are changing the way they promote and define their cultures as well. It's interesting, and if we're talking about the last year, we know the last two plus years when COVID was really hit, everybody was forced to be virtual. But now we're talking about this last 12 to 18 months where people are now returning to work. But what does that mean when we talk about it when we're hiring? We're dealing with an organization on the East Coast now that is having challenges, and the sexy word we call hybrid. Hybrid is now the word, right? What does that really mean? And so how do we promote that? And what does your culture mean as you're promoting hirings?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just add also that, organizations need to understand that the climate's changed as well. And we still see some organizations struggle with that. Not just hybrid work, but just work in general. Does it include aspects that are promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging? Is it hybrid work or not hybrid work? Is it better pay? Is it better benefits? And it's really an employee's market. And I think there's a lot of organizations that are still trying to do it, recruiting of employers and retention of employers from 10, 20 years ago. And they need to make some changes. You need to be more open-minded and think out of the box when you're hiring, and how to hire and retain the best talent.
Let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the changes that you'd like to see employers make?
So, let's take one example, job hopping. Job hopping used to be a big no-no. There's a lot of job hopping going on the last 2 or 3 years, or even the last decade, with not just different generations, but even people. We always say that, there's a big thing that came out that said, people don't want to work anymore. Well, no, they might just not want to work for you. You know, I mean, if your organization is not of the right culture and mindset and values that they want in an employer, it might just not work for you anymore. And they have that choice now where, you know, my parents' generation, they had the same job forever and ever and ever, and that's what they retired from. You know, the younger generations, they are okay not doing that. We've had clients that are really stuck on that no job hopping. And by no job hopping, they mean more than like 2 or 3 jobs in the last 10 years. And, you know, that's one key example. You just got to start thinking outside the box. And then you also got to think about, is that practice equitable? You know, that's where we kind of talk about, is it equitable, the practice of that? Remote work, is it equitable? You know, usually you'll see it's very unequitable, the forcing people not to do remote work. So, you know, the studies show that there's a big equity gap there. So things like that are just key, where people got to start thinking outside the box, especially hiring managers and leads of companies and HR departments.
All right, let's think about this. So just staying in that line, what are some ways Iowa has increased efforts to include diversity, equity, and inclusion in their hiring practices? Can start with you, Anthony, if you could share some stories.
You know, it's kind of a broad question. If I'm being brutally transparent and thinking about Iowa as a whole, I'm not sure I have really a good answer for that, because I think as a state we've tend to have made it a little more challenging, actually, with some of the policies that we have in place that impact not just people who go to work, but people who have obligations outside of work, transportation, education, etc. So that makes it a bit of it's made it a bit of a challenge here in my experience. Having said that, there are organizations who are being more intentional about their efforts, and that's what we see. I've seen an uptick in the organizations that are being intentional, and so what we want to do is how do we leverage that? How do we leverage that intentionality and spread the wealth on how valuable that is for those organizations? How do we get folks to get other organizations to jump on those bandwagons with those organizations that are more intentional about the work they're doing, and how do we sustain that over time?
I would agree with Anthony. We interact with a lot of businesses and convene, you know, employer groups, you know, periodically, and you know, it's really challenging to discuss, you know, increasing DEI because the employers just really aren't on board with that yet. You know, like someone had mentioned earlier, they're still recruiting like they did 20 years ago, and they don't understand that the landscape has changed and it's not going to revert back to the way it was. You know, we tried to talk to them about like reevaluating their policies and, you know, do you really require a driver's license for this job? Do you really need a bachelor's degree? Or is this something that, you know, someone who doesn't have a formal education could pursue? You know, there are some really good things going on. I know we are working with some employers in Lee County on developing some rideshare programs, which would be kind of employee and employer funded. So it's not falling completely on the employer, but, you know, would be a shared responsibility across the two.
And I would also say, and I know Miranda's seen this, and I'm sure Elizabeth, especially at the city, has, is time to hire. I mean, we've had clients that are like, if it's taken 3 months to even get back to a person, that person's not waiting. You know, so again, it's just like I said earlier, like Miranda reiterated, that 20 years ago hiring practice is just not working, and people want better.
Yeah, I definitely agree and echo everyone's comments here. It's, you know, when thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it can be hard to try to navigate around like what is going on in society, what is going on in our state, and having those conversations internally while also kind of staying in our lanes and making sure that we're understanding our sphere of influence. But we really, you know, have to move forward in a way that's understanding that we have to stay transparent of having those conversations of, okay, what is going on in the state that's going to make it not as enticing for some underrepresented individuals to come and want to live here or want to stay living here. You know, I've had some conversations with some individuals in the past 5 months who, because of everything going on within the state, they've legitimately thought about moving. and they are, great employees to, all the organizations that they work for. They would be a huge loss for that organization, for our state, truly. So it's, navigating those conversations and making sure that we're still having those conversations. What I would say, what I've noticed in Iowa is there's been a lot of like my positions popping up everywhere, which is great, in showing that there is effort and, some dollars being put into organizations and minds being put into organizations, so we can start having more of a conversation of, how can we partner within each other? And, working at the city, I've noticed we have so many great programs within the city and our departments, and sometimes we need like one person who knows what some of these programs are, so we can kind of connect the dots even within our own organization. So it's been super fun getting to know some of my counterparts in different cities around Iowa, and in different industries too. There's quite a few DEI practitioner group meetings that I'm a part of every month, and of course ICR hosts one as well, and it's great to be able to just keep connecting and learning from each other, and then also having some of those like strategy conversations, which with my position being fairly new in the past year and many other ones being fairly new within the past year or two, we're kind of all in a similar starting point, even if we're in different industries. So it's been fascinating to just have conversations with other like-minded individuals who might be going through similar, missteps or like this really worked over here. So I think that's really exciting, just to see how we can continue moving forward with that as well.
All right, switching gears. Oh, go ahead. Oh, switching gears here, we have an audience question. Do you integrate DEI questions in all interviews? If so, do you have questions that should be used that you could provide us? Nick, yeah. I think maybe we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, Anthony and I talk about this one a lot. So yes, you definitely should. But more than anything, you should be sharing what your organization is doing, because and be ready for questions from the potential candidate, the client, or the potential employee that you're trying to bring in. But yes, you should definitely. We're strong believers that DEI should be ingrained throughout the entire organization, strategically as well as holistically. So yes, you should include it in every aspect of business you do, and especially when you're trying to bring in talent and retain the best talent.
I think it's important to understand that great point, Nick, and because again, oftentimes organizations or humans, we tend to think in a narrow mind when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So when you hear that, I know no one's on this call is going to say it, but I know some of you are thinking it, that, do I need to ask in the interview, what do you think about hiring Black people? Right? That's a natural thing. Or what do you think about hiring LGBTQ people? No, that's not what we're saying. You don't have to ask questions like that to put people in uncomfortable positions. What Nick is saying is, if you have an environment and a culture that values DEI and B, then explain your culture. And the question could be, so tell me, Nick, how do you feel about that? And leave open-ended questions to allow them to talk about how they feel. You'll learn quickly what they think about the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and how they think about it, right? Because that you're bringing them into your culture, and they're going to be somebody that helps define your culture.
And it's a lot better asking that than questions like, what's the most expensive jewelry you've ever worn, or what's your spirit animal, or what's your favorite? I mean, those questions don't really get to anything, and people want to belong, and it's treat them like people. That's the biggest key, is treat them all like people. And I mean, there's a reason human is in human resources. Treat them like people.
Yeah. If I could add to that, I agree. I think definitely we need to include DEI questions within interviews if you are truly wanting to have an inclusive culture, right? Otherwise, you're hiring individuals who might not be able to add to that culture of wanting to be more of an inclusive organization. I think that you should really look at the level and the specific position. So it might be a little bit more work than just having like one or two questions that all positions will be asked. But I do try to give grace when considering some of the questions. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is kind of a new topic for a lot of people. And so of course, I don't want to hit someone with like one of the most difficult questions in an interview if their position might not necessarily, have something that would connect with every day. So how can you fit the question with what your culture is trying to do with DE&I and what they would be doing as well? And if it's a leadership position, I would expect them to know a little bit more about that and holding them a little bit more accountable to that as well. But something that I've also noticed, and I hope that we kind of take part in, is as we're asking these DE&I questions within interviews, even if they're not very well versed in it, like how comfortable are they answering it? I think that speaks volumes too. I know I've been in a couple interviews where someone's clearly not very comfortable at all, and you can kind of see maybe why. Is it because they're not used to having that conversation, or is it because they don't believe in it? There's different reasons why someone might be uncomfortable answering a question. So I think it's more than just the words that you ask them and the words that they repeat to you, but how they repeat them, and I think it's just kind of looking at it in whole as well.
Okay, moving on. How has onboarding changed? If we're so let's just say we had a great interview and the employee was a good fit, they've been hired. Have we really made changes to that onboarding process in Iowa to encourage equity and inclusion or diversity? Elizabeth, we can start with you. Yeah.
Honestly, I'm super interested to hear everyone else's response to that as well. I think what I've noticed, of course, within the past few years of participating in onboarding in some way, is what is included within the onboarding content. In previous years, I've heard in the city, the onboarding experience was much longer. It was like a 3-day, more immersive, in person. But of course, with COVID-19, things turned virtual. So trying to navigate how can we still engage with individuals on a virtual platform, but also staying virtual, because we want to make sure that we're not making someone feel like they're not able to participate if they are immune compromised or aren't comfortable with being in person quite yet. So I think just having that virtual option has been a huge support for a lot of employees, and still trying to balance being in person and or being virtual. But I think the content itself has evolved a little bit. If organizations really want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, talk about it from the very beginning of having them be employees as well. During the onboarding experience, and get their input on that as well. So that's how I've seen onboarding experiences change.
Yep, I would concur. I think remote and content are really the key two areas. It's kind of interesting. I look back at an organization I worked for several years ago, as I think about content, and I think about that organization, they were, I think, a very good organization globally when it came to diversity, equity, inclusion, and engagement. But I remember one day I looked in the onboarding manual and I seen like 3 sentences on diversity, and that was it. And that kind of struck me, because I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. And so I am conscious of that as I think about organizations. And it's important that as organizations are putting things in writing in their onboarding, that they're living by those values or those statements that they're making, because those could become superficial if we're not living that experience in our culture. And so, or we're not striving for that experience and demonstrating that through education and efforts and communication throughout the organization. So I would agree, Elizabeth. I think we see a little bit of an uptick in organizations who are intentional about what they're putting in writing. I always caution that to ensure that writing is not for the sake of writing, and it's for the sake of action.
I would just double down on that. I mean, like we said earlier, when you say all of Iowa, there's some organizations really, really nailing this. We've heard of organizations go as far as they're hiring a lot of immigrant populations. A lot of them are Muslim, and they have someone from that religion there helping them set up and establish people that English as a second language folks, helping them process and get through it, helping them with relocation, helping them with just getting to work, helping them with where to live, helping with where to go get a haircut, things like that, just simple things.
I visited a
Beyond
company in
words.
Southern, I visited a company in Southern Iowa about 4 years back. So this is pre-COVID. And I remember it was after 5 o'clock and I'm sitting in the office. This is south of Iowa City. I'm sitting in the office and the client says, "Oh, just a minute." It's about 5:15. And it was an animal feed place. And she comes back in the office. She had to let a few people in the door and they were posting employees. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I hope this isn't after hours. I thought it was just a first shift company." She goes, "Oh no, they're coming in for Spanish training." So every one of their employees that works for them has to learn Spanish. It's required for them, only for the words that allow them to do their jobs and communicate together in the office. So understanding the tooling and understanding what bathroom means and understanding where the cafeteria is and all the terminology that they have to communicate with. That was because they were hiring a high number of Latinos, and they wanted, part of their culture is to have mutual respect for each other's language. I thought that was really cool. And when they onboard employees and when they interview and they hire, that was part of their process. That, if you work for us, if you're non-Spanish speaking, we need you to learn Spanish here. We'll have a course after 5 o'clock. You get paid for it, and you come in after 5 for like a few weeks and learn. I thought that was really cool as an onboarding tool.
So I have a similar story that I was gonna tell, and it might actually be the same organization, but they also hire a large population of Spanish-speaking individuals, and they provide English as a second language classes on site at the company for those individuals who are interested.
Both directions.
Yeah. So it works both directions. Yeah.
Yep.
That's very interesting. We have a question from chat here. So from one of our participants or attendees, for employers doing internships as a way to recruit talent, do you run the internship through a contract, or do you handle that when the internship hours are over? It's acted as an at-will relationship, and an offer for employment will only be extended if the employer sees fit. Are there any legal ramifications? So I don't know if anyone can respond to that about internship.
Can you repeat it? I admit I'm not an HR
it.
expert, so.
Yeah, I think it's more regards to our internships contracts, and how do you handle when the internship is over? Is it an at-will relationship, or is a offer of employment kind of expected as part of the internship process?
I don't know if I have a legal answer to that. I know Iowa's an at-will state, generally speaking, and I think it would, if I were to take a stab at it, it really, really depends on whether that internship was paid or not. Was it just an internship for school credit? It was a combination of pay, and so I'm not an HR expert lawyer there. I'm not sure about that.
So I'm not a legal expert.
I know that's a great question. I'm curious if the answer that comes through. And this is probably not what they were intending with that, but when I think about internships, I think organizations, that they do want to have interns, come through their door, and they do want to, stay true to diversity, equity, inclusion, is to really look at who you're partnering with for that. And asking them for that data as well, and making sure that they consider DEI a top priority, and how are they connecting with students who maybe don't always raise their hand for opportunities because they don't know about the opportunities, they don't see themselves as successful in those opportunities, or the plethora of reasons why, versus just connecting with an organization who calls on the students who always raise their hand, who are doing the best in academics because maybe their parents are in a similar role, or they're interested, whatever it may be. And of course, we want to support those students as well. But I think if we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, I would want to be very intentional about partnering with an organization who has a similar desire to help uplift those underrepresented students. So not very legal, answer to that, but that's I think more connected to like the DEI response.
Miranda, I think you had a comment on that.
Yeah, I was just gonna, add that, part of our program is internships for youth, and this is just our program specific, but typically internship programs are a predetermined length, that they're
Yeah.
going to be in that internship for X amount of hours or X amount of weeks. So there is no obligation or requirement on the employer side to hire that individual at the end of an internship. Now, there are different types of work-based learning where that is a requirement. And granted, I understand that some programs may be different, but
Right.
typically in the workforce world, that's the way that the internships are set up.
Yeah. Often that's would you say, Miranda, apprenticeship is kind of that where there may be you're probably going to become a full-time employee at the end of
Yeah,
that
exactly.
apprenticeship.
So,
It's kind
apprenticeship
of that slight,
program,
yeah,
there's on-the-job training programs that are also
right.
through, the iWork centers in the state. And there is a requirement on the employer side that they do hire that individual at the end of that training.
Right. Yep.
And there is a contract in place as well.
Yep.
All right, we had another question from the audience. And this is going to be I think more towards the larger companies, but many of you probably have experience with these companies. Can you talk about the importance of employee resource groups and how that may play into hiring or recruitment choices by applicants?
Sure. So they're a great tool to have. I would caution not making them solely. So for example, if you have let's say you have a Latin group, not make it only exclusive Latins. But as far as for using it as a tool for hiring and bringing people in, I think it's a great tool. Just not make it, all one or the other, and make sure that the groups, if you have multiple groups, which you should have, is make sure they coordinate and they talk and they learn from each other as well. I've seen a few bad examples where they'd have a specific group and it would only be like 3 or 4 members from the company in that group, and they would never talk with anyone else. And, it seems like there's no learning or no possibility of change going that way. So I would just caution that, make sure that they're open. But I think they're a great tool, and I think they should be used more if they're used right.
Here's another question. If it's okay, you don't have to reveal the names of the organization, but could you give an example or a couple of companies that are doing a great job in this space? Maybe something other companies could use as a role model. I know we've talked about one so far, but there's probably multiple ones.
Well, I think if we were to look, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was just going to clarify as far as the ERGs go, or?
No, just as far as a company that's doing good work with inclusion and equity.
If I were to give credit locally off the top of my head, I would say that Green State Credit Union is putting their money where their mouth is and their efforts where their mouth is. It's an organization in our state that I think has been doing a pretty good job. I think I will give a slight nod to Cedar Rapids for putting Elizabeth in place. That's again, I'm a transparent guy. That position should have been there a long time ago. That's a good move. And I think now putting Elizabeth in place and giving her the support system in the state or in the city is going to be important, right? So I think someone mentioned it earlier, or Elizabeth, I think, mentioned it earlier. There's a lot of organizations that are doing it right by putting leaders like her in place. And we want to be careful. If you were to look at the turnover of those positions over the course of the last couple of years, the turnover is really high because of a burnout and lack of resources. So I think the organizations that put the Elizabeth Buchs in place are making concerted efforts and now surrounding them with the talent and the resources to be effective in their roles, I think is huge. So, not to City of Cedar Rapids, not to some work that Green State Credit Union is doing, and I'm sure there's other organizations around the state of Iowa that are doing good work.
And I think also the fact that Elizabeth's in the position where she's at in the organization too. We see a lot of times a position like that would be like under HR or in some other little pocket somewhere. And if the organizations that really do it right give that person the power to make change. So a couple organizations come to my mind. City of Buch, I know when you talked earlier about incorporating DEI questions into the interview process, I think they've done a pretty good job with that. Tyson's has come along. They've always done a lot of stuff, but they had some kind of hiccups during COVID, and I think they do a lot of really, really good stuff.
Yeah, as I think about
Co-college brought in a similar person to work with DEI. You know, they're still a work in progress there too, but I think they're trying at least to get to where they want to get.
I think as I think about Tyson's, that's a great organization statewide. And to next point, again, we're transparent people. We know they had challenges during COVID, and that's a fact. It is what it is. But there's other issues around that. But practically speaking, I mean, how many organizations do you know in the state of Iowa who have 2 chaplains on staff, who have ESL, who have psychological mental treatment? They're doing those are things that they were doing pre-COVID, and the work that they were doing, and so that's worthy of being noted.
Yeah, I just put it to the audience that's listening in. If you have some good case studies, go ahead and throw them in chat and Hoover so you can share that with others. Okay, we talked about best practices a little bit. Just throwing this out there, what will it take? I know this is such a big question, but what will it take to make real progress in matching job seekers' skill sets to a workplace culture that fits their needs? Miranda, I'm just gonna throw that to you because I know you probably work with a lot of job seekers, or your organization does. Could you comment on that?
That is a very, very large question. You know, I really think, and I know this is a question later on, but we have a lot of, you know, great workforce programs in the state of Iowa that it can assist those individuals to, you know, upskill, you know, or to remove the barriers. You know, I think barrier removal is even more important than the filling the skills gap, at least from the feedback that we're receiving right now. You know, like I said earlier, the employers are really just working on, they just want individuals with the soft skills and that, you know, that fit their culture, and they will train them on the job. Just because it's so hard to find employees, as long as they can get someone to show up to work and, you know, holds their same values, they are willing to train them on the job. So I'm not sure that it's really like a skills gap that we need to fill, but I think we need to assist the job seekers and the employers to remove the barriers that some of the job seekers are facing. And one preconception is that, you know, people don't want to work. Well, the actual truth is during COVID, we had a lot of people leave the workforce, you know, whether it was baby boomers that were retiring, or mothers that decided to leave the workforce because the cost of childcare increased 47%. You know, if we start looking at it as a bigger issue that needs addressed instead of just looking at the skills gaps, I think we can make some better progress that way. And there are lots of programs out there to assist with that barrier removal and the skills upgrading as well, if individuals are interested in that.
Right. Just to piggyback on that, you know, Liz, you said, what does it take to make real progress in matching? And I could hear the tone in your voice as you asked that question. And I think it's important that we explore what that really means. And to Miranda's point, I think we spent a lot of time in our state and probably nationally thinking about where we have to train. And I think that's important to train. We have to train people, particularly for particular skill sets, you know, to do a job. We have to upskill our state. There's no question about that. But what are we doing to think about those barriers that Miranda mentions? And those barriers reflect the culture of your organization once folks are there, right? So how are we looking at the culture of the people we have, and how are we creating a sense of belonging and marketing that out to other organizations? That's a differentiator. And we have to have organizations that are willing to take those steps to do that from leadership down. So I think if you're asking that question about real progress and asking it from a DEI lens, then my answer would be, we need to be more proactive about how we are defining the culture with the organizations, with the people we have within the walls of our organizations, and how are we promoting that to every candidate that sees our ad online, that talks to us on the phone, and that comes to our facilities or organizations to meet with us. How is that through line before they even walk in our door? And we have to be better at that.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, hard to add on to what Miranda said, because you nailed. I mean, add that something she said earlier, where how about we find more reasons why to hire someone instead of finding reasons not to hire them?
Right.
You know, I mean, you talked about whether a bachelor's degree was required or what's required, and then what you just said before too there. I mean, find reasons why to hire people instead of we have these big checklists. Oh, they didn't meet 2 of the 34 things we want them to do. We can't hire them. We're waiting for that unicorn. Train them on those 2 things, mentor them on those 2 things, or just adapt. And you know,
Well, it also depends on what part of the state you're in as well, because our board has, we frequently review labor market information and compare, the number of degrees compared to the positions that are actually looking for those. And, they're not matching up because we have too many people that have associates and bachelor's degree that don't necessarily need them for the vacancies that are available. So employers could be looking at those individuals as they're overqualified for the position. So we really need to start matching. I have a master's degree, so I'm not gonna, say that degrees aren't necessary, but they're not always necessary. We need to really start working with, especially our youth, on, alternative career pathways. Registered apprenticeships are, really coming up, and there's a lot of non-traditional registered apprenticeship programs that are being put in place. Just looking at those alternatives, not everybody needs to go to college and get a degree to fill the jobs that we have. And, the average pay in a manufacturing position in our local area is $67,000. And a lot of those positions don't necessarily require a post-secondary education. Traditional post-secondary education.
And if they do require a master's, pay them for having a master's. I mean, we see jobs all the time. They're like, oh, we need a master's for this, 10 years experience. Our starting salary is $40,000 a year.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it just doesn't fit.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could add a couple of things that were said kind of over and over this morning by different panel members. So if anyone in attendance wasn't able to hear those, I think they're just really good information to know. One, here 45% of our population growth is due to refugee and immigrant populations coming in. So I think just knowing, understanding who are those employees and what are their skill sets. There's a lot of great opportunities with Kirkwood Community College. Jasmine Almoyd was talking about this quite a bit this morning. I think, just understanding what are those opportunities. She talked about Last Dollar Scholar, the ESL program that just has $5 million more funding opportunity. I mean, that is an amazing way to leverage those programs within your organization by understanding, this is our community, this is who makes up the community, and how can we work together to maybe bring something new into our organization. But yeah, really just echoing what everyone says, like reevaluating our job descriptions. I'm with you, Miranda. I have a graduate degree, and I'm so fortunate to be able to say that. But also, I know that I have a graduate degree because of a very, specific reason. If I didn't have that opportunity, I wouldn't have been able to afford it, like a lot of individuals out there. So I know that is a huge barrier for a lot of people, and even though they have the skill sets, the potential, the capabilities to do a lot of the great positions out there, just because they don't have a piece of paper or something with their name on it, that shouldn't hold them back from that either.
Yep.
Well, I had another comment from chat about neurodiversity, invisible disabilities, accommodations. I think this lends itself just to accessibility in general, is near and dear to my heart. Are you seeing companies add this to their plans?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very few, though.
Very few, but the ones that are doing it well. And I'll give you a prime example. Some of you may have attended Entrefest this year in Iowa, and may have saw our podcast Diversity Straight Up, where we had the keynote speaker on our podcast owns a company called Ultranauts. You can look it up online, Ultranauts. It's a tech company. 100% of their employees are remote. 75% of their employees are on the autistic spectrum. Some of them can't work in light. Some of them have to work certain times of the day. Some of them have emotional imbalance. To Nick's point earlier, this company has excelled on finding out what these people can do and leveraging the diversity, equity, inclusion, and saying everybody has something in this company. You know what else they do? Every year they don't do a culture, they don't do a survey, an engagement survey to say, are you happy at work? Are you happy? They do a loneliness survey. Are you lonely? It's like, what the heck? Like, to the next point earlier, outside the box thinking, and they're winning awards all over the country. You tell me another company that is 100% remote, 75% on the autistic scale. And oh, by the way, of their 10 management, I believe 4 of them are women, 6 of them are people of color. I was blown away by that organization, and I taught them a lot, particularly when we talk about neurodiversity. They're my favorite organization to talk about.
I'm
What I would say
smiling.
as a whole, oh, go ahead, Liz.
I'm smiling ear to ear because I also attended Entree Fest and attended the keynote, and I connected with CEO afterwards, and he sent me
Yes.
the white paper. And our team has been beta testing the user manual that he promoted with his team, because I was just struck by how intuitive it was. And I think it just shows that when you incorporate diversity practices and accessibility practices into your workflow, everyone benefits. It isn't just somebody who has a disability that benefits. Everyone will benefit. And you may not know that person has a disability, even as their manager, or maybe struggling with something. So I encourage our attendees to check that out. I'll throw a link in the chat so they can find that.
Yeah.
But that was a good case study. Yeah.
I would just say, I mean, neurodiversity, but diversity in general, companies struggle with that. For one, you can't see it always. I mean, Anthony and I are both, you know, I'm 90 and he's a double amputee, and you wouldn't know it from looking at us. Neurodiversity is a lot of the same. You know, we've asked people before, like, I'm uncomfortable because they don't look me in the eye, they don't shake my hand firmly. Okay, so what? That's you. That's not them. That's a you issue. So, you know, we got to meet people where they're at. And again, like I said before, treat them like people. I mean, we're all people, and you know, we have our own strengths, we have our own weaknesses, and you know,
how do we leverage that?
Mm-hmm.
I would just echo what everybody said. You know, I am also a person with a disability. I am legally blind, so I can't read the screen and use, you know, assistive technology to complete my job. And, you know, that is one of my passions. And, you know, that's something that I'm really focusing on in my position right now, is ensuring that employers know how to provide reasonable accommodations, and that they're not afraid to, right? That they start to embrace that, you know, hiring people with disabilities, understanding that they're not a burden on the employer, that they're not a risk, you know, that they actually can perform at the same level or even higher than what people would consider normal employees. So that is something that we're really focusing on in our local area, is the education piece, the disability etiquette, you know, how to even interact with somebody with a disability, because it's amazing how many people don't have that skill set.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. We recently hosted a career fair in Cedar Rapids at Corridor Careers, and just talking with job seekers as they came through, the barriers that they were facing sometimes was not being able to see themselves in a work culture because they maybe haven't worked for a while, or being very not confident in their own skills, making a match with an employer. We talked a little bit about barriers before. Are there additional barriers that you think that we could make some progress on in the next year if we took some concrete steps? I'll throw that out to anybody.
Well, there's a couple of things. One is everyone thinks change is slow. Change is only as slow as we allow it to be. I mean, so we can take these steps, but it's also, here's the other one that Anthony talked about this a lot. Bothers is we'll have clients that we can't afford to fire them. Well, maybe you can't afford to keep them. If you have someone that is so toxic to other people that are different than them, maybe it's time for them to go. You know, and we just don't see that happening. But that's how we get that change is, you know, when people are more open to working with anyone, irregardless of the differences or disabilities or anything, just everyone's so much happier. I mean, who doesn't want to work in a happy place? And you got to think about, you know, folks that have been in these underrepresented groups, whether it's a disability, whether it's your skin color, whether it's your religion, whether it's your whatever it is, the trauma. We got to be more trauma informed. We've got to stop putting people in experiences where we're just doubling their trauma as well. So if we're doing an interview with someone and we're just doubling their trauma, and the next person's doubling their trauma, that's hard to come back from. And we've got centuries now of our history in our world of people where that trauma has just been doubled and doubled and doubled. And I think there's a lack of trauma awareness or a trauma, oh, what's the right word? Where just care.
Right.
And I think that if we can step back and I don't know if training's needed or people just to open their hearts, but we got to stop just compounding the trauma on people when all they want to do is have a job and do a good job and go home and be with their family and their loved ones.
I think if I were to add to this, I think about barriers to answer your question directly about barriers, and really to piggyback on what Nick was saying there. One of the things we talk about a lot is middle management challenges. One of my colleagues, my friends, calls it middle management freeze. And organizations, and I remember speaking with a gentleman who worked at Manpower several years ago, a good friend of mine, middle-aged white guy. And we hired temporaries. That was our work. And he was jaded every time people came into his office looking for temporary jobs, because some of them smelled like smoke, or some of the women came in, they had a stroller with a kid or two with them. Some of them smelled like alcohol from the night before. Some of them had trauma and they were issues. But one of the things he learned one night, it hit him. He started realizing his own privilege, and he started thinking, I don't know why that person came in smelling like smoke. Like nobody in there, no, what he considered normal person would do that. So he began to stop blaming, and he started asking why they were doing that. And he started thinking about why, and started digging into the why. In other words, peeling back the onion. And he would learn that the woman that came in with the stroller was because she didn't have a babysitter. This was her only thing. And oh, by the way, she lives in a drug-infested neighborhood, and she can't get out. So she's a victim of her surroundings, and she doesn't know what else to do. So the first thing she thinks is bring my kid to a job application. Some people don't see it that way. They jade themselves, and suddenly that person's not a good applicant. That's an extreme example. Not really extreme, to be honest, but that's an example of how do we think different, and how are we culturally sensitive as we communicate, talk, interview, hire, ask questions, and train on the job. And those things are barriers to employment constantly. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think there are, just been thinking through, I think there's so many different types of barriers. It's kind of overwhelming for a lot of people to just understand, where do I start? I know there's barriers out there, and I have power to hire people, and I'm in interviews, whatever roles that they're hiring for. There's hiring managers all in multiple organizations. But really, when you think about, what is that barrier that's created, and it's sometimes just within ourselves. Either one, we don't know how to move forward, so we decide not to because we don't want to mess up. We don't want to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, which is inevitable to happen. I mean, we're here talking about DE&I, and I'm sure many of us have kind of stubbed our toe on things just because everything's always evolving, and you have to be courageous enough to move forward and know that you're not going to always say or do the right thing, but that shouldn't be the barrier that stops you from moving forward to help create an inclusive culture. So sometimes it's even just ourselves, not wanting to move forward and not wanting to look at things in a different way when we're hiring individuals. Anthony, you shared so many great examples of reasons why we might not understand what someone else is going through. And sometimes we just kind of stop and listen and truly remember what the word listen means. If you all have seen the Chinese symbol for listen, it's actually quite beautiful. It breaks the character up, and it explains what each section means. And it's, the ear, the king or the mind, and undivided attention, and one, and truly listening with your heart as well. And none of that says like interrupt someone, right? And none of that says, what are you going to say next? But like just being there to listen and understand what someone else is going through, and seeing the potential in someone else. As Nick was saying, they might not be like the cookie cutter matching up all of the boxes that you're wanting to check, but there's so much potential out there that I think sometimes we just let ourselves get in the way of it. And there's this amazing quote that Michelle Obama said, and it always sticks with me since I was at Collins Aerospace, and I've worked with so many smart people, and I just like throw my hat to all of them. They're amazing, and they've helped me get to where I am. But But one of the quotes that she says is, when I'm at the table and I realize I'm not really that smart, and they're just people too, they're just people doing the best that they can. And what makes them like super extraordinary, right? Like nothing, they're just people as well. They started somewhere. So
Right.
I think we're kind of in our own way and realizing that we're not going to ever find that perfect person, and this person that's right in front of us, maybe they can do an amazing job too.
All right, we have about 5 minutes left. Just want to throw this out there. Any big ideas that you have that you could share for companies who want to take action, want to be proactive, and increase inclusivity at their company culture, part of their hiring practice or their onboarding? Do you have any suggestions for ways that they can incorporate those practices more holistically or strategically in their practices?
I would say one big thing to keep in mind is intent versus impact. Be intentional, but also realize the impact that whatever you're doing is having on everyone. From everyone. I'll just say it like that.
And I would say, for them to really look at their community partners, and leverage the resources that are available to them. The Iowa Work Centers, there's 15 of them across the state. And through those Iowa Work Centers, they serve reentry citizens, they serve migrant seasonal farm workers, they serve dislocated workers, they serve people with disabilities, so connecting with those Iowa Work Centers as a resource to, really try to increase their DEI, and serving those underserved populations would be a great place to start.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, big ideas, but I think an important idea, it really speaks to what Elizabeth said, which is kind of looking inside yourself. I had a meeting last week. Someone called me out of the blue, a white female who works at an institution here in Iowa. And she's a career coach and was looking for ways to work with her students about life after college. And she knows that most of the students at the institution are Black. And she's not sure how to approach them. And she's on her own personal journey trying to really understand diversity, equity, inclusion, and just be a better human herself. And she did something that she said she's never did before. And that was, she called me up and said, "Will you go to lunch? I want to talk to you about a few things." And we went and had lunch for like an hour. Now, some people might perceive that as the I have a Black friend thing, right? There's a difference between I have a Black friend. I'm not prejudiced. I'm not racist. I'm not against LGBTQ. I have an LGBTQ neighbor. That's playing games versus this person really wanted to learn and they didn't know how to address it. So she found someone that she trusts and she went and had a conversation. So I would say the big idea for me is many of you that are leaders, find somebody that you trust and not be afraid to have the conversation. You don't know unless you ask. You can't help yourself unless you're willing to learn, and your mind has to be open. And many of us that aren't in positions of CEO have more power than we think we do. That's the big idea.
Yeah, I think everyone said it really. I was going to say the same thing Miranda was talking about, who are those in the community, and of course do a shout out to Top Rank. There's so many great organizations who've been doing this work for some time, and it just picking up the phone, calling them, asking the experts that are your neighbors and saying like, help me, help me do this. So yeah, just shout out to them and everyone else who has been in the game for a while.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I would just end with a statement. I mean, if you're looking for a reason to make this a priority for your organization, time and again, companies who invest time, effort, resources in diversity, equity, inclusion show revenue growth and become more welcoming in communities for their employees. So if you're trying to sell this as a priority to management, make sure you're leveraging all of the benefits of focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and put your money where your mouth is. I don't know if anybody else had comments on that topic, but.
It's funny you say that. I remember a mentor of mine told me in the space that she could quickly determine the importance of an organization's how organizations value diversity, equity, inclusion by looking at their budget. You could tell in 5 minutes how they really value the organization when it comes to that space. All kinds of money for the computers, all kinds of money for the brick and mortar. Nick and I were giggling last week about an organization that we were giggling in jest, but we were honestly.
They all got a picture of us giggling, but okay.
No, it was in jest. But the point was, Nick said, here's an organization that we know is not investing at all in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to redesign their lobby.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Be sure to connect with our panelists through Whova. Share your comments in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you in our next Iowa Ideas session. Thank you very much to our panel.
Thanks, Les.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.